such as ours, must try to contribute to peace in troubled parts of the world. While this may seem to some to be a hopeless task, it is the right thing to do. Otherwise, innocent lives will continue to be lost or forever damaged on both sides. Let me be very clear and unequivocal. While Hamas has shown its true colors for all the world to see, I do care about innocent Israelis and Palestinians who are perishing because of their insanity. I know that there are Palestinian moderates aching for a peaceful solution. And I know that the Liberal Party continues to support what has been Canada's long-standing Middle East policy through successive Liberal and Conservative governments. 2 states living inside secure and recognized borders. And we believe in Canada in some way that we can and must be helpful in achieving that objective. Thank you. Merci. Toda raba.
You also got a standing ovation in Toronto. Thank you very much, MP Garneau, for your warm words. I would now like to ask you to fix your eyes on the screen for a special video.
Canada and Israel are the greatest of friends and the most natural of allies. This friendship between us is rooted in history, nourished by shared values.
We uphold Israel's right to exist. We uphold its fundamental right, like any member state, to defend innocent civilians against acts of terrorism.
Canada supports Israel fundamentally because it is right to do so. It's a country at the great turning points of history. Canada has consistently chosen, often to our great cost, to stand with others who oppose injustice and to confront the dark forces of the world.
In our view, liberal democracies and international terrorist groups are not equal. They do not deserve equal treatment.
It is thus a Canadian tradition to stand for what is principled and just, regardless of whether it is convenient or popular.
True friends are measured by whether they are there for you when you need them most. Whether that support is steadfast, even when it's not popular or expedient. And as we've all seen, regrettably, this past week, these are indeed incredibly challenging times.
Now, friends, I understand that in the world of diplomacy, with one solitary Jewish state and scores of others, it is all too easy to go along to get along and single out Israel. But such going along to get along is not a balanced approach, nor is it a sophisticated one. It is just, quite simply, weak and wrong.
Just as fascism and communism were the great struggles of previous generations, terrorism is the great struggle of ours. And far too often, the Jewish state is on the front line in our struggle, and its people are the victims of terror. Canada will not accept or stay silent while the Jewish state is attacked for defending its territory and its citizens.
And therefore, through fire and water, Canada will stand with you.
Those of us who were in Israel at that momentous occasion will never forget the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister, the Minister of External Affairs. Tonight, my great pleasure and honor to present to you Israel's great champion, the Honorable John Bill.
I always start out a speech with a throwaway line. You don't really have to think about it. I almost start every speech with saying it's a pleasure to be here. It's not a pleasure to be here. I'm not happy to be here, and I'm not glad to be here, and I'm not glad that all of us, every single one of us, feels a need to come here, given the tragedy of recent days and recent weeks. I wish we could be here under much happier circumstances, as we have been in this very hall, on many celebrations and many great charitable causes. We gather here at the JCC to stand in solidarity with those who are living each day in terror for themselves and their family, and indeed their entire country. A culture of fear and terror has fallen on the state of Israel. We'll be here for 60, 90, or 120 minutes. And some hours, the Jewish state is under attack by 5 or 10 rockets. I don't like the term rocket. It sounds very antiseptic. It sounds like a spaceship. These are bombs. These are ammunition that are targeted against civilian populations. As the ambassador said, with one goal: to kill, to injure, and to wreak terror on people and their families. Can you imagine if we were in Sderot right now, and you were told you had 20 seconds to get to the bomb shelter? Or the luxury, one mother told me, her son feels so lucky that he's got 90 seconds because he's in Jerusalem. I want to tell you though, as I look around this room, and I know if I was in Toronto it would be the same, I am so incredibly impressed with the strength of this community. Once again, the community has come together with strength, with courage, with purpose, and most importantly, with unity. I want to tell you, it makes me so proud to be a Canadian. I want to tell you for a moment what also makes me proud to be a Canadian, and that's the courage and the leadership of our Prime Minister, Stephen Harper. First moment, not the second week, he has stood as an international leader on this issue, standing up for the Jewish state right to defend itself. That's leadership in action. Now, some of you will know my grandfather, who was from Ottawa, was a great mentor to me in my life. He went to Europe in 1943 and then stayed in the Canadian Forces for 25 years. And as I said earlier, the great struggle of his generation at a young age, as a young man in his early 20s, was the fight against the menace that was fascism. And then throughout his time in the Canadian Forces, fighting communism. Well, the great struggle of our generation, from here to Israel, from Mumbai to Buenos Aires, from right around this world, is the great struggle against terrorism. And far too often, far too often, the Jewish people and the state of Israel are on the front lines of that great struggle. I've seen this firsthand in just about every place that I've visited. I visited the community center in Buenos Aires that Rafi spoke about just a moment ago. And dozens and dozens and dozens of people were killed that day. Still no justice. I visited a Jewish center in Mumbai. It was still ripped apart, walls blackened, a a bomb and from the fire, where it showed its face again. And about a year before, someone was killed outside of the Jewish Museum in Brussels. I had the occasion to visit there and to learn. These are places where the Jewish community has come under attack with deadly consequences. I've also seen it in Israel firsthand. The thing that disturbs me so greatly is when people, here at home or abroad, try to compare for a single moment the actions of a liberal democratic state with that of an international extremist terrorist organization like Hamas. There is no comparison, nor is there any room for moral relativism when it comes to terror in the state of Israel and Jewish people. When I see editorials, political commentators, pundits, leaders around the world say, you know, both sides need to stop this violence. Both sides need to de-escalate. It's wrong. It's wrong. Hamas is a terrorist organization whose very purpose and raison d'etre and fundamental motivation is the destruction of the Jewish state of Israel. It has fired thousands of rockets, not at military installations, but at civilian populations. It started this conflict, and it is the one that has to stop it. There are absolutely no excuses for their reprehensible actions, and they must stop, period. When the new government of Egypt stepped in to try and stop the violence, I was absolutely stunned and pleased at how quickly the government of the State of Israel took up that offer to end the violence. For a brief moment, I was filled with optimism. I even asked my staff, I said, will they go ahead with this event on Wednesday night at the JCC? Well, we need to. Sadly, we're not here celebrating the end of a conflict, but we're looking at a terrible human price. Hamas, however, would have none of this ceasefire. What has Israel done? It is exercising its fundamental right to defend itself and its people. Do you know, I think liberal democratic states have one fundamental responsibility. It's not a right, it's a responsibility to protect their populations, to keep their people safe and secure. I wholeheartedly agree with Mark. If this happened in Canada, Canadians would have one single goal, one simple demand from their government, and that would be to make the rain of rockets stop, and stop immediately. But far too often, the Jewish state, Israel, is judged so differently by friends and foes alike. Israel doesn't just have the right to defend itself, it has an obligation. Hamas, in conducting this war of terror, and I wish you could measure the terror that's being instilled on the Israeli people. Jewish, Arab, Palestinian, a culture of fear that's developed, but you can't. Hamas is using civilian populations as shields in an attempt to further their terrorist causes. Imagine if you were a Palestinian family living next door or across the street from a Hamas terrorist who's launching rockets from their rooftop. Imagine if you showed up with your children to school one day, only to discover there was an arms cache in the school. Or if you were a nurse, and you showed up, a Palestinian nurse, and you showed up to work to find out that Hamas was using the hospital as a staging ground or a launch pad. And I want to say this, it is tremendously interesting. There are a small number of terrorists in Sinai that are launching rockets. There's a lot from Gaza. There's some from South Lebanon. But there are no rockets coming from the West Bank. And that's because the IDF is there. But also because President Abbas and the Palestinian Authority increased their capacity on security, on their capacity to be able to build an institution for a future state. And Canadians can be very proud of that. Through our development assistance, we have worked incredibly hard to provide tangible and considerable support for the Palestinian Authority to build these institutions, and that has clearly paid off. While some in the media and elsewhere call us to be an honest broker, we are working with the Palestinian Authority to help them build a future state, one that is safe and secure with borders with the State of Israel. Another thing that angers me, and it wasn't from the Liberal Party one. Another party. I won't name names. Another party talked about this being a battle or a war between Israel and the Palestinians. And that is not true. This is a battle and a war against a liberal democracy against an international terrorist organization named Hamas. I have noted and I commend President Abbas for his clear rejection of Hamas's tactics. Canada will continue to support the Palestinian people on humanitarian issues, security, capacity building, and economic development. We all want a two-state solution where you have two peoples, Jewish peoples and Palestinians, living in peace and prosperity, and yes, security. It is not lost on me that we look at quotes from around the world that some political leaders don't seem to be as tough on Hamas as President Abbas. And that is unfortunate. Friends, these are incredibly challenging days for the people of Israel, and frankly for their friends and family everywhere. I know far too many of you in this room, whenever the phone rings, you're worried about is it a friend or family member who's in Tel Aviv, who's in Haifa, who's in Jerusalem. And you're worried about whether they're safe and whether they're secure. We will continue to work constructively with our Israeli friends and show them the support that they need, because that is why you have friends in this world, friends when you need them, friends for the tough days and not friends for the easy days. Thank you very much.
I need not say anymore. I hope everyone here realizes that not only is the job of being Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister a difficult one, but as being the champion of Israel in the face of evil, it's not an easy road to hoe. It takes lots of guts, lots of courage. There's no end of appreciation that we have for you and the Prime Minister. I think everybody here loves you for what you stand for, and we would like to all give you a hug, but I'm going to appoint myself as the ambassador to hug you on that. Folks, at this point in time, I extend to our friends in Toronto and Atlantic Canada a very successful conclusion to their program. Am Yisrael Chai, and thanks for joining us all together tonight for this great event. We're not done yet, they're not done yet there either. I would like now to introduce a video. Some of you may have seen this, but it's very important for you to see. This is a video which shows the care that the Israeli Air Force pilots take in their surgical strikes against Hamas.
יש גם תנועה לתיר פה שאני מבין עכשיו, וגם שני עיגולים יש אנשים נאחים.
כל האזור הזה,
כרגע יש 15 איש בטווח של 10-15 מטר מהמבנה התורה.
Tobin Kamen, born and raised in Ottawa. He served in the 101st Airborne Paratrooper Division, and he returned to Ottawa just over a year ago. At the start of Operation Protect the Veg last week, he dropped everything, booked a flight to Israel, and is there now. Please turn your attention to the screens to hear a message that Tobin sent us today.
Good evening, Ottawa. I am speaking to you from the coastal city of Ashkelon. This is a city that has been bombarded with hundreds of rockets during this conflict, as well as many rockets over the past 9 years. Since I returned to Israel to serve in the reserves last week, I have been on bases along the border, helping my former unit in the paratroopers with whatever they need, and bringing them, as well as many units, supplies donated from people in Israel and from abroad. Some people have asked, how could I drop everything, travel thousands of miles to help in a conflict that doesn't involve me? This question has the same answer as the question of why I joined the IDF in the first place. It's simple, because Israel is the homeland of the Jewish people, not just the homeland of Israelis. And behind the scenes, Israeli security does not just protect Israelis in Israel, its mandate reaches far beyond Israel and protects Jews living everywhere. It is for this reason that I joined the IDF and swore to protect her sovereignty and her citizens. As I said, in 2012, during Operation Pillar of Defense, when I was actively serving in the 101st Airborne Division of the Paratroopers, the people of southern Israel deserve better. Now this can be expanded as Hamas has improved their capabilities and can reach our largest cities, and they are reaching them. Israelis should not have to spend their nights in bomb shelters. We should not have to rely on the Iron Dome for protection, and most of all, we should not have to plan our daily events knowing our proximity to the nearest bomb shelter. Yesterday, Israel agreed to a ceasefire, and for 6 hours we were assaulted with over 60 rockets before Israeli leadership decided we cannot sit back any longer and allow this to happen. This ceasefire showed Israel's want for peace, even if the terms aren't favorable to us. For Israel is determined to bring back peace and quiet for Israeli civilians. The issue of safety and security is one that spans every type of person in Israeli society. It doesn't matter what your background is or what your belief system happens to be. Without a national sense of dependable security, this country cannot thrive and it cannot survive. That is why, only by standing together, do we have a chance at creating a sustainable, secure environment and future for the State of Israel and the Jewish people worldwide. As a Canadian citizen, I am proud to be part of a country that has stood behind Israel in her times of need and continues to as a partner in trade, education, and diplomacy. Canada stands behind Israel, not because it is obligated to, but because of the shared morals, values, and ethics of which Canada and Israel hold to the highest regard. Knowing this is not only meaningful to myself, but also to the people of Israel, knowing that Canada not only supports them, but empowers them to continue on when they are under threat and feeling alone. Thank you for being here this evening and for your continued support for Israel.
It took a lot of work to put this evening together, and we are deeply grateful to our partner, CIJA, Reb Shimon Fogel, and his entire staff, and also the staff here at Federation for making it happen. And particularly, it's been a pleasure to work together with Andrea Friedman, the CEO of Federation, who has been night and day on this to make sure that it came off well. It is now my great pleasure and honor to call on her to address us.
This has been a hard few weeks. A hard few weeks to be a Jew, a hard few weeks to be someone who longs for an ambitious and robust peace process, a hard time to be a human being. It seems that there's no end to violence, no end to despair. We mourn the loss of Palestinian civilians, and our hearts are heavy knowing the pain that these families are enduring. All human life is equally created in the divine image, and we mourn for the innocent Palestinians who have died as a result of Hamas's reckless and grotesque actions. Just as we mourn for 37-year-old Israeli Dror Hani, murdered yesterday by Hamas. Tonight, we heard both Minister Baird and Mr. Garneau express unequivocal, strong support for the State of Israel and for Israel's right to defend herself. And for that, as a community, we are extraordinarily grateful and appreciative. Since the start of Operation Protective Edge, over 1,000 missiles have been launched at Israel, terrorizing all of our citizens. With the increase in Hamas's terrorist capabilities, virtually all of Israel is now on the front lines. More than 5 million Israelis have been forced to take shelter, from Beersheba and Negev communities to Haifa and communities in the Galilee. Sadly, even the remarkable Iron Dome defense system cannot protect Israeli citizens, young and old, from the trauma of an endless barrage of Tseva Adom alerts, from the trauma of trying to bundle small children into a safe room, and the trauma of trying to ascertain the risk of quickly moving an elderly parent to a safer location or staying put. Our hearts break for our Israeli brothers and sisters. Although we wish it were otherwise, there is little that we here in the nation's capital can do to physically stop the missiles, but there are important ways that we can help. Get involved. Stay informed, write letters to the editor, and write letters to the government when they issue principled statements, as our government and the Liberals have done. For example, if you would like to thank Minister Baird and the Government of Canada, and Mr. Garneau and the Liberal Party of Canada for their steadfast support of Israel, please go to cija.ca and click on an action alert. For other actions you can take, please see this card, which most of you, we ran out after 400, have received when you first arrived. Secondly, if you have friends, family, or even acquaintances in Israel, reach out. Let them know that you're thinking about them and let them know that you care. Thirdly, counter boycotts of Israel through boycotts of Israeli products. CIJA, our national advocacy organization and our valued partner in organizing tonight's rally,